Hi, everyone. I'm Carrie Cassidy from Project Camelot and very happy to be here today. I have a fascinating guest, David Dubyne, and he is here with me now. David, say hello to everyone.
Good afternoon, everyone. Good morning, good evening, wherever you are on the planet.
Okay, great. And so this is going to be a fascinating discussion because I know almost nothing about where you're coming from. I actually got your name from a previous guest and just went with it because you sounded interesting. And so it's this is like a day's notice, so I haven't had time to read your book. I have looked over some things. I think you're dealing to some degree, and correct me if I'm wrong, with the electric universe. Is that correct?
It does tie into that? Yes, indeed. The cycles of the sun are driven externally. It's not CO2, it's not you, it is the sun that's affecting our climate on the planet, which is electromagnetism. So, yes, we're right in the same sphere there.
Okay, great. So, really go ahead and sort of introduce yourself and your topic and really your book and let us know where you're coming from and where you're going with everything.
Okay, I appreciate you having me on today. I really do think that this is one of the greatest events in human history unfolding in front of us right now. It occurs on a regular 400-year cyclical pattern. It's turned to the grand solar minimum, where the solar activity goes into an extremely low state. It affects global crop production, and then the knock-on effects from that, if we can't grow enough food to meet the demand of 8 billion people, something is going to have to shift in the economy, the population, and just the way that we do regular business across this planet. Now, I am of the opinion that almost all governments on the planet know what's happening. Have you seen the blizzards that just ripped through the grow zones in the United States that reduced the corn output? It stopped everything growing on a dime. So whatever the maturation was of the crops in the field, they've stopped there. But with the biggest floods in American history that occurred this spring during the planting season, almost everything was behind by 2 months. And now this early season freeze has really decimated our crops. I'm not even going to say reduced output. But when you look around the planet, you start to see the electromagnetic effects of our magnetosphere weakening and our jet streams moving out of flow. Now, there's a phenomenon called the intertropical convergence zone that moves on these multi-century cycles that will move moisture north or south, and these jet streams will have a chance to bend further south or more north. Hence, we get this equatorial vortex where we're getting a lot of heat unbeknownst to us, and then we get these extreme polar vortex events. But it all results in one thing: reduction of food output. And I tell you what, this is year zero. That's been termed by FEMA now as the first year from this point forward, we won't grow as much food as we did the last year. So as we march forward in timeline here to 2028, 2023, there's significant marks in time that will be significant downsteps in the amount of production globally that we can produce of food. And the whole, I guess, tapestry weaving together is the economy, is the population cycle, the debt cycle, and how many people will we able to feed if we don't come up with new tech and if things can, continue as status quo. But it seems that it's going to, because nobody's telling us about the problem that we're facing. And that's the reason I really wrote that book, was explain the problem, talk about the solutions.
Okay, so what I'd like you to do now, though, is actually explain how you got into this, what your background is, and, why we should listen to you in essence.
Okay, when I was working in China, I started an algae biodiesel company. This was back in 2006 and 7 when the oil prices were skyrocketing, and I really believed in global warming. I thought it was all about CO2. I thought it was all about human influence, and I went to that step to actually start a fuel production company with 5 other Americans in China to grow algae, a single strain of algae, and then separate to get the oil and then have the green matter for animal feed. So everything was used, nothing wasted. Well, the oil price collapsed, and I was sitting over in Asia thinking, what can I do next? Well, plants are plants. So I went to Myanmar and started to look around there. Can we bring algae over into Myanmar? Can we, put a higher value product at the farm gate for the Myanmar farmers, because it had just opened up and they were looking for new kind of farm tech to come in, if you will, because they were trying to bring people out of poverty. So growing algae would be a great, alternative for them, high value. That was really not so doable because of the lack of electricity, and the infrastructure just wasn't there like it would be in China or the United States or somewhere where we could have computer monitoring of the pools to see if there's contaminants or whatnot. But I stumbled into coffee over there, and I'd always been a fan of coffee, been around coffee quite a few times. So had some guys down there who were interested, and since I lived in Taiwan, we brought some samples up, and I started trading coffee there, and then we ended up selling it in the United States, in Vietnam, also in Taiwan. But the thing was, they started to experience cold weather damage in the coffee plantations there. And see, this is what I didn't understand is when we were talking to the coffee farmers, they were saying that they had to overplant about 12 to 14% of these new seedlings that they would put out in the fields because the cold damage would kill off a certain percentage. And then also at the top leaves, after the plants grow to anywhere 3, 4, 5, 7 years, the top leaves would get killed from the cold, and then the bean density would be less because these microspherules of water would form and they would freeze solid. So then when they would melt, they left these little pockets in the beans. So the density was different than it was even 10 years ago. And then, talking to them about what did this mean, they talked about their great grandfathers when they first brought coffee to Myanmar in the late 1800s had experienced some of the same things, because you got to realize these are generational families running the farms. So that set me on this quest to figure out. I was looking at a 5-year forecast to see how much coffee we could really get and how much we'd have to plant, all these different ROI values here as a business proposition to look in to see, could we make it work in Myanmar, getting new coffee production if we prepaid for them to plan it out and take that extra production on. I never knew about cold, so then I started to look around. I said, that's kind of strange. I believe in warming. It's got to get warmer every year. And why is it cold down there? It's Burma. That's the old name for Myanmar. And suddenly I stumbled into John Casey's work, and he started talking about these 400-year cycles in the sun. And if you're unfamiliar with John Casey, he was a former NASA space shuttle advisor. He was the lead investigator after the space shuttle had exploded, and he was the NASA lead investigator on that. But as soon as he started talking about cycles in the sun driving climate, not CO2, he was fired. He lost. He had to end his career at that point. So once he realized that it really was the sun and they were trying to silence his voice, he went off and started speaking a lot about that. That's where I came into it. I talked to John early 2014, and we conversed a lot, or late 2013, somewhere around that era. And then I started my YouTube channel saying, hey, we got these challenges here, and here's the forecast. If it's truly happening, and if this is a grand solar minimum, you're going to start to look for these areas that had been previously mapped out as cooling during the Maunder minimum, which was 1640 to 1710. And if we go back in time, we go back into the late antique little ice age, you come back into the Wolf minimum, the Sporer minimum, and these are just on a timeline going back about every 400 years. And they mapped out where the crop losses were, not only in China, because Chinese took meticulous records, all along the Silk Road where the Arab traders were, they took meticulous records. We have all these proxy data now about pollen and the ice cores, which are so famous, but there's also stalactites, which you can measure rainfall and temperature from off the stalactites. The pollen will show you which species of plant we're growing, and then you overlap data sets and you can get a good indication. Did the temperatures rise or fall? Was it wetter or drier? And they've mapped all this out over 5 or 6 cycles. So I was thinking, all right, we're going to start mapping this out. I'm going to make forecasts. And I started doing that in 2014, and that's why we're talking right now, because a lot of the things, I'm going to say nearly 100% of them are coming to fruition. Now, when I started my YouTube channel and when I started the podcast and I went on there doing my writings about all of this happening, I was on an island on my own with John. And there were a couple other people out there, maybe Piers Corbin over in the UK and Dr. Abudzhamatov over in Russia at the Bakobo Observatory, Valentina Zarkova. There's a small handful of people out there talking about this. But now take a look at the plethora of people, saying we have a serious problem. We need to start taking a look at how this cycle is going to affect our agriculture. And it's already begun. If you take a look at this last year, you'll see how many losses there's been. And it's been a progression of losses since 2015. You can really start to map it out. It's getting more intense in some areas. And what's interesting enough is you go back and you look and it's these same areas that they mapped out in the Maunder minimum of cooling temperatures. So that's kind of it in a nutshell and why I'm doing what I'm doing, because it's the most important thing of our time right now. If we don't have enough food to feed the population of the planet, we really don't have a society or a civilization. We revert back into competition for everything. And I don't think that's a good way. If we know the problem's coming, perhaps we can invent solutions or think of solutions so we don't have to go through such a tumultuous time in front of us.
Okay, so I hear what you're saying, but there's a lot of people out there. Of course, everyone is demonstrating about climate change right now. And my philosophy actually has a lot to do, and my channel, so has a lot to do with the manipulation of weather and the fact that we haven't had natural, what I would consider natural weather, probably since the 1960s, I think is when they started in earnest to manipulate the weather. And I'm just wondering how you wrap that analysis into your overview, and also a follow-up question, which you can, hopefully remember, is also timing, because people, when they go back into climate change, they go into, rings of trees, et cetera, ice core samples, and so on. And there seems to be a lot of confusion on that score. So I know those are two kind of big questions, but can you address those?
Be happy to tackle both. Yes. So this is where the electric universe ties into everything. Now you think about our sun, it's 1.2 million times larger than the Earth, and it's sitting just a little bit over to the left there. So electrically and magnetically, the way that thing is affecting our Earth, we're coupled with it. When you look at the magnetic field lines coming off the sun, they actually connect to and intertwine with our Earth. Now the magnetic field of the sun, we call it 1 AU, how far it goes out. From the sun to the Earth is called 1 AU, or 1 astronomical unit. The sun's magnetic field goes out 100 AU. So we're in the top 1%, literally the 1%, of electromagnetic effects from our sun on any kind of planetary bodies in our solar system. So when the sun steps down its intensity, electromagnetically, the charge, literally the electrical charge from that, our Earth is directly affected, and it needs to step down too. It's got to equalize, because you got to think, for the last, 3,500 years, our sun's been in an extremely active phase. So our Earth is also in an extremely active phase charge-wise. Think about it as positive and negative charge, literally electricity, electromagnetism. So when the sun steps down in its charge, our Earth needs to match that. Well, what's happening is you're starting to see all these sky phenomenon everywhere. Say the atmosphere is becoming more highly charged. And this is where we come right into the stratospheric aerosol geoengineering and the different programs to manipulate weather. Now think about this. This is a fully natural cycle where our Earth's atmosphere is becoming more highly charged, more ionized. And what that means is things can hold state longer. If you're talking about wave frequencies and electricity itself, beams, or whatever you like to term it, it can hold state longer. Now we're starting to see plasma ropes that are visible now that have never been sighted before 2017. They're actually able to hold a glow mode phase enough where we're able to see them with our eyes, because the electrical conductivity is highly charged enough where it's turning on into a different frequency glow mode, literally, where we can see plasma glowing in the skies. Now we go back to the petroglyphs, and that's what they saw too. The ancients had a lot of knowledge that they've passed down to us in terms of sky phenomenon, and which will repeat. But it doesn't repeat unless it's an electrified sky. So when we take a look at what the military is doing, they're riding on top of a natural cycle. So think about this. If you go back 40 years, when you're talking about the inception of a lot of these programs, controlling the weather by 2025, perhaps they knew in advance that the Earth's atmosphere would become more highly charged, where what they're doing, they get a higher output for the input right now because it's a higher charge. So anything they're doing is going to be amplified. Now you've seen this runaway weather that we had. Now I am firm believer that they are, manipulating the weather and manipulating systems. I see everything. You should see how many trails are going along before fronts pass through. Now imagine if you could get double or triple the amount of electrical or phase output out of those trails up there, and those nanoparticulates. Metal conducts electricity. So if you can get a higher output because our Earth's atmosphere is more highly charged, they're getting more bang for their buck, literally, versus what they would have 30, 40 years ago. And you notice the weather back then wasn't as, say, chaotic or as intense, because they were only getting a very much smaller output compared to what they're getting today, because our atmosphere is more highly charged. I mean, you're looking at these events of ground to sky lightning. that they've never seen at this kind of density and intensity before. You're getting not electrical, not even thunderstorms, but full on like barraging plasma electric storms coming down on our planet now with 30,000 lightning strikes in an hour. These are insane storms that are here now. And the tops of these thunderheads too, if you're taking a look at something called a red sprite, it's actually a electrical connectivity back to the ionosphere. It's our thunderstorm heads are trying to reach up to space and connect from what the sun. So the amount of these red sprites, before you would see them as a flicker and they would hold for maybe 1/100th of a second, 1/10th of a second. Before they were things of legend, nobody really had photographed them because they happened so fast. And previously with our photography equipment, it's just maybe luckily random happenstance you got one by accident. But now they're holding in the sky for seconds, where the entire atmosphere is lit up with these sprites, where they're holding for a second or more on their signature. And we're also seeing these blue jets, these blue auroral jets that are coming straight out of the top of typhoons. That's direct electrical connection back to the sun. You can call it an Earth-spot connection. Ben over at Suspicious Observers talks about this. A lot of people are talking about electrical effects coupling onto our planet now from the sun's magnetic field. We're right in the middle of it. So when the military wants to take advantage of this, either bouncing a signal much further, they can bounce it far, far further than they ever could now. Putting up some kind of electrical frequency in the sky to hold pattern more densely, that's what they're getting, and they're riding on top of a natural cycle. But who knew in advance that this cycle was come here? So their tech that was previously okay is now super phenomenal because we have this natural pattern that just added a whole layer of soup in the sky, if you will, of electrical just plasma up there that they can ride and jack into and really do an enormous amount of exponential things above what they ever could before. And see, this is where these two worlds meet: electroconnectivity, the electric universe, our geoengineering, and then what's happening with this grand solar minimum. Now, I'm of the volition that we could use this for the best of humankind, where we could smooth rain patterns in this grand solar minimum so we can continue to grow crops. Perhaps they could put blocking fronts up there to stop Arctic fronts that are going to come down and rip apart our grow zones while it's still in the maturation phase. If the tech's that good, why are they using it for harm instead of good? Why can't we use all this tech to be able to allow us to continue to grow food? But you know what? All I've seen in this last year is everything set up is to destroy crops on this planet. Take a look back, and I'm serious. I really would like you to do your own information. Anybody listening out there, I don't want you to listen to me. Don't. I want you to do your own research. I'm going to sprinkle some seeds out here, some breadcrumbs for you to follow, but you have to do your own research. I don't want you to believe me. I want you to try to disprove everything I'm saying. See, this is the whole point of it. Why is every pattern, everywhere you look, from the droughts that are, wiping out Australia? Australia is now a net wheat importer because they can't grow enough food. Look down in Australia. What's happening? Why are these Antarctic fronts getting pushed up so heavily straight into the grow zones of Argentina and Brazil? Look what's these, huge, huge polar vortices coming down into Canada and the United States, just wiped out. Look, they can't even plant over in some parts of Europe now. The drought cycle over there, although that's probably natural, but it could be amplified. The Czech lands back in the 1700s had a mega drought. So that's what I wanted to try to dovetail into was, you take a look at these older proxies. Well, people have mapped out where the droughts were really well. So I'm going to say the Czech lands in the 1700s are a good example. They dried out into a mega drought for some 9 years where they couldn't grow crops. And then they have these stones on the river, and they're called the drought stones. And then at the bottom written in there, when the water gets super low, is when you see me cry. Because back then there was no international shipping, and when the water got that low, they couldn't grow crops. And, the drought stones that they have where they wrote at the very bottom, when you see me cry, is like feet lower now than it was. So are they also, with this geoengineering program, trying to wipe out our food supply? And see, this is where it gets into my gray area of I just don't have the answers. But what I see is everywhere around the planet where food's being grown, the weather systems are being manipulated in such a fashion to reduce the output even further, either too much rain or the drought or blasting the cold inside there. Now, this is all set, of course, with the jet stream dips and the intertropical convergence zone moving with this grand solar minimum, but again, are they riding on the natural cycle to try to get a bigger outcome? I mean, the proxy data is out there. You can go through literally 15 different proxy sets. Proxy is just a different way to look at things that happened in the past by looking at like established science. Like a tree ring is a good one. You can dig into a tree ring and see how old those trees are. Or you can find trees that were buried in a flood, and you can find out what year the flood was and then use the tree rings then when the tree died to count back further. Or pollen. You can drill into a lake on the top of an alpine mountain and then see how much pollen is up there, because the pollen stays good for quite a while, thousands of years. And they can see which types of plants were growing. And then by that, they know how much at the minimal level a plant needs for moisture, or the temperature that a plant will grow of a species. So when they get these pollen, all they do is match it up and go, all right, clover, it can't grow at this temperature and it needs this much moisture. Pine, it needs this much moisture. And then they can see how the alpine regions, how the tree line actually moved up or down on natural cycles. And once you start to collate all this data, and again, one of my favorites is the ice. We have the ice cores, that's fine. We can see what the temperatures was, CO2 concentrations, but there's something called ice rafting. So when there's much more snowfall and the glaciers are growing, they break off and they float out into the ocean. But when they do that, when they're pushing much faster and growing and really moving, they take larger pieces of debris with them. And then as you come off coastal areas like Greenland's a good example, they can see how big the debris pattern is, and then they drill down into that and they can see, well, there were larger rocks here, so there must have been a faster flow of glaciers, and they can measure it back in time. There's an enormous amount of data out here to try to overlap to see where these cycles were, the effects they had. But coming into geoengineering, if you wanted to decimate a population without starting a war, because that would be too messy, and I was talking to John when I said this as well, with our social media today, people are going to see right through the lies. Like, they can't get a global war, and I say them, I'm talking about the leaders of nations, these people behind the scenes, IPCC, many people, governments saber rattling, and the ones, the central banks that really want to get these wars started, because there's war in rebuilding, or there's money in rebuilding, there's money in destruction, there's money in the actual war effort itself. We'd see through that now with social media. We're so interconnected that it's going to be difficult for them to get a real world war started again, because nobody says stop. Well, we can all say stop. Like you see over at Extinction Rebellion, people are saying stop, and it's pretty much stopping in London. They're pulling people off the tops of the trains. They're ripping their signs when they're trying to block roads and pushing them out of the way. They've had enough over there in London, so it's actually stopping the Extinction Rebellion, because everybody said enough is enough. Like with the war effort too, if it really were to come into some sort of bomb dropping, we would all say enough is enough and it would stop. So the governments don't have that option anymore to try to limit population or reduce it. Next best step, use a natural cycle, blame it on nature, nobody's culpable, and then run geoengineering on top of it to reduce some of the crops along the way. And that's where I think we are. But again, that's my personal opinion. You can agree or disagree, but Carrie, I think I rambled too much there. I'm sorry.
Actually,
you go ahead.
No, I have several things now I want to ask you. So I am very interested in all of this, and I think this, what do they call it? Extinction Revolution, or whatever they call themselves. This is very problematic, because these people are really asking for legislation. They don't know what they don't know, and they don't know what they're asking. They're asking for legislation to come through and legislate their lives in such a way that it changes the climate change, which is kind of funny when, at least from my point of view, the people they're asking to help them are the very people making the climate change in the first place. So it's crazy. So, I hear what you're saying in terms of they're using this electric universe model, and I believe that there's a lot of validity to that, okay? But what I don't understand is, as you're saying, how does that lead to what they want and what they're creating? And they're sort of looking down, sort of a long way. Now, I'm not, when I say there is actually a split, and how much the so-called, it's hard to say the good guys, that good half of the Illuminati sounds like an oxymoron, but nonetheless, to say that the ones who are not necessarily absolutely wanting to eliminate populations are operational in the secret space program. So are the ones that do want to eliminate populations. You're looking at a future on planet Earth where you think, if I understand it, and we didn't get that far into this yet, but you probably think there's a global cooling trend that is going to lead to some people say, and I wasn't sure it was in your book, but a mini ice age type of situation. Now, personally, I'm not so sure that's true, but your model might be correct, your outcome might be wrong. You know what I'm saying? So this is what I'm trying to kind of delve into, and I want to understand is where you think the sort of push comes to shove between manipulating the weather on the one hand and getting what they want, in that category, as well as what you think might be happening like to the sun. Okay, so the idea here being that they can't manipulate the sun, so therefore whatever's coming off the sun is as natural as it gets in theory. Okay, and is that true? And have you also taken into account our movement into towards, I guess, the galactic center? They say into merging with Sagittarius. Okay, so have you looked at our merging with Sagittarius? Do you see our movement through? Because the heliocentric view of our solar system is that it's kind of like led by I guess the sun, and it follows kind of in this pattern, right? Almost looking like a fish shape. You know what I'm saying? And it's not quite like we have been taught. And so that means that when we go through different areas of space, that affects everything and everybody. And it affects, Pluto and Uranus and Jupiter. And Richard Hoagland and David Wilcock did a joint paper that was quite sort of groundbreaking quite a while ago, talking about how all the planets were heating up. So I don't know if you saw that paper or are aware of it. And so what I'm trying to say here, I know it's a long question, but if you can bring in the people that are protesting, what they think is happening, the fact that they're manipulating the weather, of that I am absolutely convinced, and the evidence is pretty prolific. And then how they're using the sun to do what they want it to do, and yet at the same time achieve their aims. I know that there's parts where you said, that's kind of like not in your pay grade, so to speak, but nonetheless, we have to out here try to discern what is coming down the pike and why. And so I don't know if that group of questions makes any sense, or you can grab onto any of that. So go ahead.
No, I can intertwine all of those pieces. They make sense. And I actually would like to talk about that since you're open for it, because a lot of people I talk to don't want to go down that realm of possibility where actually I've thought about these things and how they're coupling together. So the first thing, the areas of space that we're traveling through, we're going through an area that's going to be more, let's just say dense, electrically dense, if you will. Now, this explains a lot of how these planets are heating up, and all of them, because, they are telling us it's CO2 heating our Earth and we're responsible for everything. But you can't explain that when all the other planets are showing electrical activity as well. They're showing hot spots. The storms are intensifying. Storms are disappearing. Cloud layers are appearing. Now, the only thing that could possibly relate to that is the galactic cosmic rays. So each magnetosphere, or each electrical field around each planet is changing slightly, weakening, obviously, because our sun's stepping down in state. So more galactic rays can pound into these other planets in our solar system. And the same thing that they found with galactic cosmic rays, and this is Heinrich Svensmark's research, more galactic cosmic rays mean more earthquakes, silica-rich magma chambers and volcanoes erupting, and more and denser, heavier cloud layers. And then we're seeing this across all planets. So it's not us. We're seeing all the electromagnetic effects and cosmic ray density effects across all planets. See, and even if this one piece of information was put out there, people would look at the climate debate quite differently. And here we are with these, Extinction Rebellion people and all this climate news around. I fully think it's just a distraction. They're getting us to prepare for the wrong outcome on purpose. Because you have to think about the end goal of this is to depopulate part of our planet. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about that. That is the end goal. Because when we start to take a look at these cycles intertwining and overlapping on top of each other. I like this book called The Fourth Turning, if you will. It's a great book. You should read that. It talks about the civilization cycle, the debt cycle, and how these are overlapping on the generational cycle. And once we come to the fourth generation, everything has run its course. And generally, in the past couple thousand years, it seemed that a world war would start, there'd be a lot of destruction, a lot of death, and then they would restart the system again based on a new monetary policy. This comes into the whole central banking issue of everything. They've really run to the end of the debt cycle. There's no more growth in debt. If you look around the planet, there's very little space left to grow based on debt. Because if you're talking about incredibly poor third world, nobody can put anything for collateral against a loan. So that's a no-go. Everywhere else you go across the planet, everybody's leveraged to the hilt. So they're so far in debt that they can't get more debt. And it's pretty much as far as we can go. Everything's pretty much been built. I mean, you look around the planet, how much more can we really build? String, wire, nothing. Now it's about services and maybe some products. And it makes me laugh. I was just back in the States last week, and if it's such a climate emergency, and then every other advertisement I see on the TV, I don't watch TV normally, but I was home with family and they had it on occasionally. It was all about buy a new car, buy a new this, do this. I get all these products and trinkets and junk and bits of junk across the ocean on a container ship that's spewing out pollution. But hey, don't worry about it. It's a climate emergency. We got to change the way we're living here. It's a distraction. If they can get you to look the other direction, all these things are going to hit you at 1,000 miles an hour into a brick wall with no airbag. And I think that's the end goal. Because if that were to happen, think about how few people would be prepped. Think about how few people would take this point seriously. Because when I try to talk to people, as soon as I mention the sun driving climate, it's just a stone wall or they're accepting, but we'll call it 97% of people stonewall it. And they're like, no, it's proven science. It's not CO2, or it's not the sun, it's CO2, da, da, da. So hardly anybody wants to talk about it. Whatever the way it's been formulated, this climate debate's turned more into religion than actual science. But at the end of the day, the distraction factor is times 10, and everywhere you look, it seems to uptick another distraction level 1. Now, by keeping the entire planet distracted and dividing us through all of these schisms and chasms that they drive wedges in us, whatever way, it doesn't matter if it's race, socioeconomic, your job, your neighborhood, whatever I don't care, even your hobbies, what you talk about politically. They have divided us and then subdivided and then redivided and divided again. So we're a divided populace globally. We have very little awareness because everything around is such a distraction. So when you try to drop in these things about, hey, these cycles in the sun are repeating, and personally I think it's a 2,000-year repeat at the very minimum, not a 400-year. I'm going to call it a super grand solar minimum this time. It's just too many of these cycles are overlapping. And then we start to look back at the ancients, what they talked about and what they told us about their cycle patterns. We got the galactic cross, which seems to be matching up in that 12,500 year time frame right now. Seems to be a lot of commentary. And again, back to the whole where our solar system is passing through. It's a more plasma dense region of space with more debris in it. So if the ancient had known these cycles were coming around and our solar system would pass through this again in our transit, they would know the same thing from the heavens are going to bombard us. They would know the same electrical activity, plasma, electrical currents flowing through the plasma. We're going into an electrically amplified area of space. When all these things are happening with the equilibrium of our sun, that's shutting and reducing its output into our earth, that's also reducing its output. Electromagnetically, we're changing and we're heading into a really amplified, heavily electrified, plasma-dense region of space with debris. Now, you can't tell me all these things are coincidental as we march through everything. Now, again, for me, in my own opinion, it's all about depopulation, because you have to depopulate to restart the debt cycle. I understand cryptocurrencies out there, and we can use a lot with crypto. We could do smart contracts for grain deliveries and a lot of things. They got the plasma network out there. Speaking of plasma, different kind of things to get up for individual, quick payments, if you will. You can use Stellar, some in Digibyte, whatever. There's a lot of fast ones out there, way faster than Litecoin. But in the interim, that's going to be a sticky mess to try to get everybody to move from a fiat system they're used to into cryptocurrency to trade and then start using that daily. It's got to be a total reset. And that's what I think these powers, these central bank powers and these, large United Nations organizations, including the IPCC as kind of the spearhead for distraction, to get the most population loss possible to restart the system when we get out the backside, say 2035. And, Carrie, I hope I wrapped all those pieces in there together that you were looking for the answers. If I forgot something, please let me know.
Okay. Well, it's great that you're such a clear speaker. You really seem to have this in your head as to what, the model is and what you think is happening. And I have no trouble believing that the sun is a major impact on our climate. Okay. I believe, obviously the sun is directly linked actually to the volcanism on planet Earth. And so that when the sun does whatever it does, you can have increased volcanism, and we do have increased volcanism. That's one trend that I think is authentic, let's say. Okay, although they can trigger volcanoes, and there's some evidence that they're trying to do so in Hawaii, even right now, and have done so in the past. But nonetheless, the volcanism exists, and it's a natural, it's stimulated. So on top of that, though, there is this idea that the planet undergoes transformations. This idea of the electric universe, in a sense, paints a universe that's very connected, right? And at the same time, it's affected directly by maybe things that we haven't even quite zeroed in on, okay? And plasma gets back to the old model in the 19th century of ether, which I've always thought was more accurate than the way people think of it now. And in fact, Pete Peterson, he's passed on now, but he's a scientist who was a Black Project scientist. You may be familiar with his name. And he talked about the information field, that the scientists in Black Projects basically consider that we're getting information right here. It's all around us. And then we pull it in. And I also have somebody who's talking about AI. And AI, I was told by a secret witness, thrives on data. That, in essence, is its food. And that if we are surrounded by what we call, a sort of ether or plasma or whatever, and it is full of information and AI thrives on information, then there's plenty of food here for for AI to grow and thrive. So that's also another sort of piece of this picture. Now, what I'm wondering is, in terms of where we're going as a planet and these cycles you're talking about, now you just said you thought perhaps it was a 2,000-year cycle, and that would bring us, now I'm not sure, I'm not terrible at math, but we know, or we believe that Atlantis fell in 2000 BC, let's say 12,000 BC, okay? So approximately. And to me, of course, Atlantis has always been a reality, and I have a number of reasons for believing that, including the fact that more and more evidence is coming forward now, even down in Antarctica, which is what they're digging down there to find out, is what was Atlantis, what did they have going on there, etc. So when you bring that into the picture, in other words, what I'm trying to bring in here is the idea that consciousness has a role. And if consciousness has a role, then, and all the planets are electrical, and we're electrical, and the universe is electrical, and I don't even know that model all that well, but then you can basically extrapolate that the consciousness, the planets are consciousness, okay? And I believe Cameron Faley, for example, one of my witnesses, who's not really out and about at this moment, but he did talk about how, isn't it possible that if we have an incoming body, that incoming body, that the planets in our solar system are in such a position that they will be consciously moving out of the way or allowing for this other body to come in. And so that brings in a lot of different elements when you look at the model itself. So this is what I'm asking you to do, is I'm asking you to look at the model you have and see it in terms of consciousness, and see it in terms of where is it going, with what purpose, aside from the black magicians that want to use it to whatever dark purpose they have in mind. You know what I'm saying? Can you look at Atlantis? Have you looked at Atlantis? And have you gone back that far and thought about the changes of consciousness on planet Earth? Because it is said that in essence, we are going to go through what Atlantis went through. In fact, we're doing it right now. And that there is a place in Egypt, this might interest you, called the Labyrinth, that was discovered and then covered up. It was supposed to be announced to the world. They, the major networks were going to be, bringing cameras down there, et cetera, et cetera. And what happened is they just hushed it up. And the belief is, and the information we had from Patrick Jarrell at the time, who, again, had the wrong conclusion, but the right information in terms of he was in the labyrinth. He was there. He saw the walls, and he believes that there is some kind of diagrammatic explanation for what they were going to go through and what they went through then, for the fall of Atlantis, in essence. Okay? And a lot of the people that survived Atlantis went to Egypt. So this is where you get the Atlantean influence on Egypt. Anyway, I travel in Egypt. I take tours there. I look at the temple walls constantly. I'm interpreting them and reinterpreting them in different ways. But I know that's, again, a lot to, but I think you get the gist of what I'm asking.
Yeah, I do. And this brings it to a whole different level here about the spiritual aspects of these changes that we're going through. You can look at it in one way. The civilization is going to, brush off to the past into the dustbin of history, but it doesn't have to be doom and gloom like that. Vibrationally speaking, everything's rising up, if you will. These electromagnetic changes in the sun, everybody on the planet's feeling that something is not right now, or something is changing, but they just can't put their finger on it. That's the electromagnetic frequency from our sun changing. Now, us being receivers of that, we should be able to work and amplify these energies ourselves. And you've seen through history countless times of civilizations just completely disappearing, leaving almost no trace except the buildings. Now, again, are these uplifts and these vibrational shifts that we're about to experience again? Now, for us as a human, perhaps we shift into a different dimensional realm, but the Earth itself still retains some of the damage on, this cosmic bombardment. We go through these 12,500 year cycles, the crossing, they call it the galactic cross. You have the full precession of the equinoxes, but that midpoint between, the Younger Dryas was the last one. If you want to put a scientific name to the galactic cross, let's do the most recent one called the Younger Dryas. This matches up perfectly with accounts all across the planet of cosmic bombardment, the disappearance of civilizations, which once great cities, which, by the way, we're using wireless power technologies, and a whole different array of earth energies, to power their societies, and they just disappeared in a blink of an eye. Well, now we're starting to find a lot of scientific fact pointing back to this 12,500 to say, 11,700 year time frame of this Younger Dryas. And if you go further back, they start to occur on these repeating cycles. And Douglas Vogt's done an amazing amount of work on this. And he calls it like a mini micronova from the sun that sends out a shower of not only debris, but energy. It's almost the entire surface of the sun, and everything of the plasma from the sun releases in one gigantic puff, and it pushes toward, and it hits our Earth, and that is the catalyst. And you'll find a lot of things disappear at that time. There's sudden, genetic shifts at this time that come in, where they find new species that suddenly evolve literally overnight. So there has to be some kind of massive electrical spiritual connection that comes in that allows dimensional shift during this time. So what we're left with here was like the hard rock things that are, I understand the Earth is a conscious living being, but it chooses to stay behind. The surface creatures, they split dimension, or they move vibrationally into a higher frequency range, if you want to call it better, dimensional realms or frequency shift range. But it's all about the same thing there. But the rocks and the pyramids and the things that were of these older cultures, the megaliths, whatever, those stay here. They didn't shift. The people shifted with their consciousness. And when we come back into this vibrationally, this AI entity, think about the thing that we have built out over the last 150 years for this fourth dimensional consciousness, if you will, to exist inside the wires, the copper wiring that we strung across the planet, all the fiber optic cables that we have put around the planet. I am in firm belief that something is inhabiting that as its own ecosphere, where it's taken out of the ether and jumped into a third dimensional space through the copper wiring. Look how many high tension cables, how many wires are across the planet, millions and hundreds of millions of miles of everything intertwined. Now with 5G, we're giving it a space to actually exist next to us in the real world, right next to us. You know, all these things are talked about in the ancient cycles of time, of how we're just repeating a cycle, it seems. And it comes back. It's always the same things. Light versus dark, spirituality, shifting consciousness to the point where enough people think about it on the planet at the same time in the same day. And this is where the shift occurs. It's an instantaneous thing. Like, we don't have to roll through all this death and destruction, I don't think. And this is where the mind frame is. But look how our societies have been set up since the 1600s. It's only about the hard stuff around you. They've dissuaded us from looking at anything esoteric or anything spiritual, vibrationally wise. They don't even want you to look at Tesla technology. What about Marconi? They don't want you to look at Dr. Rife with healing frequencies. Everything that is on the vibrational and frequency realm is totally been erased from memory. And if you even talk about it, you're laughed at. You know, like, they put us in a box from kindergarten. You say, hey, you can see your friend over there that we can't see because we just don't have that ability. Some of us, we've lost it, been coached out of it. As soon as that child says they're able to see into a different vibrational frequency, they're taught, you can't see that, you don't see it, you can't do it, don't touch it, not allowed there. But, again, what about free power? Why can't we use frequency vibration for free power? Healing our diseases, we can't do that. We can't even talk about it without being, demonetized, websites taken down because we want to talk about frequency healing. And it all comes back to that same thing. Vibration and frequency. And here we are with the sun's doing its thing again on a multi-thousand-year cycle, multi-hundred-year cycle, overlapping cycles. We're coming into a dense region of space. Again, vibration and frequency changes. And here we are in the whole, you're talking about intertwining of star systems here. We're back into that whole galactic loop, 25,000 plus years. Hey, maybe it's a whole 100,000-year cycle. What if it's 500,000-year cycles? We're coming into a 500,000-year cycle overlapping. But anyway, these great changes are here, and they've been forecast. So when we look at it, we do have the choice to live at it in fear or look at it at the greatest change, that we have opportunities to vibrationally shift into other realms, if you will, that are outside the chaos realm. And maybe I'll leave it there, and I don't know if I answered your question fully.
Well, I think, in a sense, my question is pretty far-reaching. So I think you're sort of circling it. And I'm not sure, in this kind of venue, how far we can go with that. But
dive in the middle. Dive right in the middle.
But if you can bring that into your, I don't know whether it's in your book, but if you can bring that into your thinking at this time, and also into your analysis of this model that you're working on, I think it would be valuable. I think there's also, now, I don't know about this for sure, in terms of science, but there's also the idea that, as you kind of hinted at, that, and I think the world and cycles are actually not circles, they're spirals. So if they're a spiral, they spiral, up, let's say, and they do sort of, spiral down. But the idea in, if we want to think about this positively, is that we are spiraling up. And that means that when we come around to the same place we were back in the days of Atlantis, we will bring another piece to the puzzle. Something new will come in. Because I don't see this as being a closed system. I see this as being an open system. So that means new things can come in. And along with that, expansion, obviously. And so, in other words, I would hesitate. I look into the future as a precog, and I have seen the future happen in front of my eyes that I've seen prior to that. Okay. Now, this happens to me a lot, and I also get deja vus. And sometimes when something's going to happen, I get a lot of deja vus kind of back to back. Anyway, what I'm saying here is that if there is something new, a new element that we should look at in the future, it may not necessarily mean that we're looking at an ice age. That might have been something that happened in the past. And see, I was listening to another show that kind of is related to this about the electric universe. And someone in the show was saying something like, oh, well, they think humans don't want to look at, times of deprivation, negative times in the past, etc. But I think because obviously we reincarnate, that however you want to look at time, even though time is simultaneous, we're looking at it in a linear fashion, one thing following another in this, 3D going into 4D universe or megaverse here on Earth at any rate. So what I would say is that means that actually, rather than repeat the past, we may be bringing the past in to see it from a different vantage point and dealing with it in a different way. And this is our opportunity, our challenge, and why we'd even come back to deal with it again, right? So that's the challenge, I think. And I think that if we can manage to see the new elements, and it is said that children with more developed DNA, for example, are coming onto the planet at this time. In other words, things are changing. When new children come in, what they do is they affect the energy around them and they raise the vibration, and you're talking vibration and frequency, so you definitely are on that page. So this is what I would wonder about, in other words, why kind of devolve to, oh, it's happened before, so it's going to happen again. I don't think that's actually accurate. When I look at the future as a precog, I don't see it repeating itself as exactly. Even going back through the American Revolution, now we're going through a sort of time in which a lot of those astrological sort of mapping is showing that we're going through some similar time as to the American Revolution. You might have heard that. And for example, Trump is basically said to be the reincarnation of Patton. Well, what does that mean if General Patton is now the president? Something has moved. Something has transitioned. He's on a different level than he was when he was a general in charge of a war. Now he's, as an executive who would call for a war or not, right? So you can see it on the microcosmic level, and you can see it on the macrocosmic level. So I think it behooves us to look at this a little bit differently. And I also want to say that along with reincarnation comes memory. And as you begin to open to your past memory is when a lot of these phobias, I know a lot of prepper type people, and they are pretty much obsessed. And, I went to Malta, and I spoke at Malta and toured around Malta and looked at ancient sites there, et cetera. And I was approached by people in the alternative community, and they said to me, we have a lot of people here that have memories of water, of being inundated by water. In essence, probably the fall of Atlantis and what happened to the Mediterranean during that time, I'm guessing. But you know what I'm saying? In other words, we do have memory, and we do have memory of cataclysms, and we bring it with us. And those of us that are more worried about it and tend to look at it as like a really dire negative thing tend to, in a sense, attract that negative thing to ourselves. At the same time, I would urge that just because you're going through a period, this is allowing us to have a different vantage point. So that's what I would ask you. Are you not reaching a conclusion that is basically looking at these cycles as just being a circle, repeat, when in fact it's a spiral?
No, because the iteration we're going through right now is going to be so much very different than any of these past, if you want to call them grand solar minimums. You have to think about how we have changed so much since this last one in the 1600s. I mean, look at the interconnectivity that we have now with the internet. We have the global shipping. We just didn't have that before. We didn't have the type of modern agriculture that we do. We didn't have the ability to bring our food growing indoors. So the way that we're going to move through this is going to be entirely different and something never experienced before. Now, for me, I think of it as the greatest opportunity in human history. not on the doom and gloom side, because as we move through these shifts here, there's going to be more need for your services to help people understand the process, understand the problem, offer the solutions, and anybody who has a solution-based mind as we move through. All right, the old world's going to start to fall away as we get into this new shift here. But as we are going through the shift, they're going to need a lot of new ways to think, and a lot of new inventions will be, forthcoming at this time. And if you have the mindset to help instead of, hoard, if you will, there's going to be enormous opportunities out there for everybody who would be going through the shift at this time. So I don't look at it as a doom and gloom. You need to buy a bunch of food and hide in your basement and hope that you're going to ride this thing out. I'm like, maybe if you get together as a community and you start building vertical agriculture inside buildings and start using disused parking garages and coming together as a community to share skill sets and come up with new solutions as we move through this, maybe we can build our own parent-nav magnetic motors so we don't need to rely on the grid. Perhaps this is the switch point where we come off the centralized control into individualized or more sovereign aspects of our living and being. And that's the next step of what, as the shift occurs, the next step is going to be back to the sovereign nature of ourselves and our communities. And this old heavy, archaic, the Kali Yuga type heavy energy will just dissipate in that iron age. We don't need those systemized control anymore. We can move off and do it on our own with better solutions that don't pollute, like we've been set up to string our planet with wires. We never needed that from the days of Tesla. Why were none of these applications ever put in? But perhaps this is the time now where we're going to start to bring these technologies in. But as we move forward, there are going to be so many shifts with so many opportunities to be able to, take advantage of that shift, offer the solution, build the skills, and then, thrive during these times. As I look at it, I don't think about lack and scarcity. I only think about the abundance of this time as we're coming through, especially those who are going to be able to supply new food growing applications. And that's kind of where I'm taking this. Yeah, and the manifestation of, what kind of energies you're bringing in. I'm just in the abundance phase of looking at it as well. Look at all these opportunities moving forward. We could have the best world that we've always envisioned of this enlightened age where we live in this non-polluting era where we take things more in our, we're growing our own food. The communities are more back to like they would be what you consider communities in say 1200 AD, but with all the modern tech so we can have incredible lives on top of that. Like the meshing of two different times. If you want to talk about time being all encompassing and over looping in on itself, not linear, well, what about these two time frames that could blend in on themselves where we get the best of the tech, the highest quality of life, mixed in with what we consider more of an older age where there was more community aspect to it, trading between each other, not relying so much on a system of monies that have locked us into place, not having to live where you're just struggling day to day to pay your electric and your rent, but far, far beyond that where creativity and the human spirit can once again be unleashed because we don't need those basic needs to work almost all day to meet the basics. Like those would all be taken care of. And I really think we're going to shift into something like this because once people get the taste of it, it's going to be very difficult to put them back in the box. This is going to be a multi-decade event that we're going to roll through here. And at the end of it, the solutions that are brought out through this thing, I don't think they can ever kind of reel us and control us back into the same kind of, system that they have today. Because once people get that taste of we don't need that anymore, I don't think they're going to want to go back to it. And that's hence the new shift in the way we're going to go through it in an entirely different way. Something so unthinkable of any other way that's these transition periods have been passed through before. And here we are right now. It's a great time to be alive.
Okay, that makes sense. Now you've got something in your book that says the methane lie. I'm curious what you're talking about, like with regard to that, and also how, while we're on the subject, how you wrap into your sort of model what is in essence the geoengineering of the planet that includes making it a more radiation-filled environment. So how does radiation and methane sort of impact on this electrical model that you have?
Well, the methane was more spoken about how they're trying to demonize it, where we could be using it for a power source that burns clean. When after you burn methane, what comes out at the end? water vapor. So this whole demonization, that's the whole part of the thing. There are a couple pages about that. And in the next book I'm writing, it's all about the derangement of the climate debate at the moment. Why is methane being so demonized in the moment when it could be one of the greatest allies in us? Because biogas, for example, you talk about solutions moving forward to individual communities that could create their own power. Imagine you use all the waste that we have, not only human waste, but just vegetable waste and all kind of farm residue waste and just waste in general that can be decomposed. I mean, they're doing it in some cities already, but why is methane being so demonized? And why do they not even want us to look at methane? The minute you say methane, people just turn off and go, oh, it's bad, it's bad. It's a 20 times whatever gas of CO2. But for me, I look at that and say, wait a second, that is an actual trump card to get us out of some of the power needs and situations we're in that can be used and created in every single community across the planet. So that's what the whole methane part is about that in the book there, is looking at the absurdity of why can't we discuss methane? Why can't we use it? And everywhere you look, they want to put, the fart pack on the cow, and they want to try to capture methane out of individual cows in California. And if you're a dairy farmer there, you have to buy these. It's called a fart pack, and you have to install it on the top of your cow. It's so sad because they drill a hole in the side of the animal, and they put this like rubber flange in there where then they connect the hose every day, and instead of the cat, and then they sew it up at the end there, and all the gas actually is forced through this cow's stomach up into these bags. It's horrible. But that's the links they're going to prevent any methane, and that's where we get into this absurdity of it. And the radiation factor, we went into the possibility of, if they developed new, cleaner, safer radiation technologies, they could also be used for power. And that was a whole thing in the book, that it was meant to be just an idea, but not really at the moment doable, because there's a lot of tech that's on the shelf that's not being brought out, that we could reuse a lot of these things that we need to dispose of currently, of waste from radiation facilities that could be turned into clean power. And instead of like putting it in the middle of Yucca Mountain and burying it in granite, why can't we think about new solutions where we could use that, what is considered waste, and turn that into power that would burn completely, and then there would be no more waste for it? Because some of the research that we're looking into, there's actually that currently on the books at the moment, these different type of Gen 4 and Gen 5 plants that they're out there that are using residual waste from these earlier kind of, rods that we have that they're trying to get rid of. But again, why is that not being talked about in development? And if it is, it's in a secret development. Perhaps it's part of these secret programs where this will never be released to the public, but then again, it could be used for some. So imagine if you're in control of the government's continuity of government, and you have these Generation 5 nuclear power plants that are using all the waste from the stuff that's above on the planet. You got a never-ending fuel source coming out of the stuff that's polluting the surface of the planet, but they're down in their tunnels there with Gen 5 or Gen 6 nuclear power using all of our junk to actually burn clean, and it comes out and there's no residue at the end. And that's what those two things were about inside the book there, was to try to get you to think outside the box of the possibilities of what could be and where we can take it. And this irradiation of our planet is just sickening at the moment. And now they're dumping all this radiation off of Fukushima, and it just continues. And how many more leaks will there be? And, as we get into this grand solar minimum, the electrical effects, what happens if there's a large CME that takes down part of our power grid? That was the next part in the caveat in that whole Gen 5 and 6 nuclear power that could burn clean and reduce all the waste to nothing. What if we get a power outage like the Carrington event, or much larger? Douglas Voigt's talking about a mini nova from the sun, and then some scale in between that. A mini nova from the sun would be like an X2000, where the Carrington event was, X25, X30-ish. But what if we get something like the X100 range? If that were to hit our planet in any way, shape, or form, where there's nuclear power plants, where there'd be no way to control them, they would all go into meltdown phase. And again, what about backup solutions for power on there using magnetic motors, Parendev motors, but like on large industrial scale? So if we do get these power outages, we have magnetic motor power instead of having to rely on diesel generators. But the whole thing was, they're not letting the tech go. And anytime you want to start to build out, manufacture these Parendev motors, you have a visit at the door. there's so many solutions that are being masked, pushed under the rug, hidden from us on purpose. And that was the part of that is, look further back to what's being hidden from us, not allowed into the public realm. And yeah, that's what
Okay,
I have a
well,
feeling on that.
I appreciate everything you're saying, and I think there's no doubt that these technologies will come forward and have to come forward, and will
must.
change basically the world when they do. And in fact, I have a theory that says that the airlines, for example, are actually using a certain amount of free energy to run the planes these days because they went bankrupt for all intents and purposes. They can't use the fuel in the ways they used to in order to get from point A to point B. And they actually have to mask it. So whether I fly all the time, and I know that they are arriving much sooner than they're supposed to to their destinations. And this is part of the changing environment, probably going into 4D as well. In other words, they're trying to mask things, and they're masking things by making them look like they are, using the same old, but in reality, they're using a whole different model. And that goes for PG&E and the fires in California, and what they're basically doing behind the scenes and what the end game is, of course. But when I asked my question, you didn't quite answer my question per se against the model. What you answered was new technologies coming in. And that's not actually what I was asking. I was asking how, in terms of the overall, let's say the powers that be know the electrical model is correct. Let's say they're using it in a certain way. Then on top of it, what's happening is we know that they are purposely not cleaning up the radiation spills, including Fukushima, by the way, and that the technology exists to do so, okay? We know that for a fact. Now, at least people like me that have whistleblowers, et cetera. So, what I'm wondering is they're allowing also, from what I understand, this methane to get out, not to do with cows, actually, but that there's other reasons why we have methane, for example, going up the rivers in the Gulf that could ignite eventually. That it was even said by one of our super soldier whistleblowers, Duncan O'Finian, that he sees the future of precog, and he said there will be a time when there will be rivers of fire, presumably rivers filled with methane that's been escaping and from various ways and means. So from my point of view, we do know that the reptilians and the Greys prefer a methane radiation-filled environment. And I believe they're influencing the dark side to actually make this happen. And there's a motivation there. But in terms of the electrical model, I'm just wondering, and then I also want to ask about the idea of a hologram. How we look at this in such a way that you're using this certain model, this electrical model, based on, to large degree, on the sun, and there are effects on the sun coming from even other dimensions, presumably. But nonetheless, how do you look at radiation and methane, the buildup that we've got here on planet Earth, and what that end game might be for allowing that? We're reaching kind of a critical juncture. Now, I can tell you that, for example, they know that and this is well known, X-Men movies, etc., that if they want to mutate the human race and get new powers, that if they jump up the radiation on pregnant mothers, etc., that the babies coming out will be mutants. They could have powers, and they could be precogs, for example, and that gets into certain other things as well, because the powers to be need precogs, children to be precogs, and there are a lot of children that are autistic that are natural precogs. That kind of maybe it's a trade-off. They tend to see the future. But at any rate, so do you understand what I'm asking? I'm asking about how does the electrical model deal with things like radiation and methane? How does that work into the model?
Well, if you're going to talk about terraforming a body in space, it would have to do with how our atmosphere. Now, again, these changes are not going to be forever. And that's the whole thing. As we're going through these cycles, and, I've asked myself the same thing about the atmosphere being changed for different beings to be able to inhabit it. That's great for now. But then when we get now you got to realize also from the sun, there's electrical inflows coming into the sun that are powering our star from the outside. So these electrical phenomenon that are coming through, if you look at the Yuga cycle, obviously they've mapped it out in terms of the intensity of these current flows into our star. And you also understand that comes back around again, so nothing is forever. So if they are terraforming and trying to get a higher resonance frequency, now see, I'm not an expert on how radiation is going to be influenced in a plasma sphere as the electrical charge inside that either is heightened or lowered. You're going to get a different resonance of substance around that can hold form. And throwing methane in there, and then also the sulfur dioxide, there's going to be a lot more volcanic eruptions. So you're starting to add in extra different elements in there. And then we have all the strontium and the barium and the aluminum and all the metals mixed in on top of that. I firmly believe that those metals are there to create a more electrified environment as well. So whatever's happening with the radiation on top of this, but now you're almost starting to make a cake of terraforming an atmosphere into electromagnetic effects for the metals. You're getting the plasma effects, hopefully holding a radiation pattern in something different. And that's as far as I can take it on that, because I just don't have some of those answers for you. But I can see how all these constituents are adding in with sulfur dioxide, the methane, the metals inside, and then the radiation, and then smash it together and then put a different electrical input into it and then see what comes out. Because when you look at Sapphire, I don't know if you're familiar with the Sapphire project, but it's called a star in a jar. And what they basically do is try to replicate the sun with plasma and different electrical flow inputs in there. And when they do the different electrical input into that plasma medium, you get signature change inside there. You get flickering, you get dots forming, you get all kind of different signature changes inside, which means a different medium has formed based on the electrical input. Now, that's pure plasma inside at superheated temperatures. But imagine bringing that out into our real sphere now, where you're adding all these extra things in. You could depending on what the inflow would be electrically, you could get all kind of substance, literally physical substance, turning and churning out of that. And that's kind of where I got to leave it, because I don't have anything else to say on top of that, Carrie.
Okay, well, that's very interesting. The Sapphire Project, is that what you called it?
Yeah, it's SAFIRE, Sapphire. It's called Star in a Jar, and they they work with plasma and electricity together to get different outcomes physically in terms of medium of what electric and what plasma can form. And they're getting substances out of there like, wow, where did this come from?
Okay, well, there is something to be said, of course, for chemtrails and the concoction that is coming out of the chemtrailing, and that is actually acting as a kind of a cooling agent and creating atmospheres and changes in our weather, obviously, and that's intentional. There seems to be a reason to put certain things into the skies and into the air we breathe, et cetera, including nano, which is actually getting into our bloodstream and I believe is about creating a transhuman effect, right? So the transhumanism is a big agenda item, and through atmosphere and chemtrails and nano, and also raising the as you say, making it more conductive to the electrical impulses to come in. It is also said, by the way, that some of this chemtrailing is also causing a cloud cover above which, that first of all will limit the amount of the rays of the sun hitting our Earth, that affect our human ability to think, actually, and to raise our vibrations, so that people that don't get a lot of sun aren't being stimulated in the necessary ways the humans need to thrive. So that's one thing. There's another thing that goes on above a cloud-filled sky that has been chemtrailed, having to do with the fact that there is an added electromagnetic signature to anything incoming, and such that they can detect things coming in from other dimensions, specifically UFOs. So craft that is materializing, and they can have battles above in the, have a cloud cover, and above the cloud cover be conducting battles that humans are not aware of. Okay, so that's one thing going on. And we also know that, for example, UFOs have been seen over volcanoes, and they've also been seen drawing energy from the sun, and so on. So there is something going on with that. And also, in theory, they come in during storms when natural vortexes are created. That makes quite an easy opening through which various craft can enter this atmosphere. So in other words, we have a multifaceted playing field here that is, yes, perhaps this electrical universe model is correct, but within that, all these other things are going on simultaneously. And so I don't know where it all leads with your model and where you're going with it, but I can say that it looks like we are, not just the earth is being terraformed, but in essence, humanity is being terraformed to become different than we are physiologically, in essence, so that perhaps we can survive in different kinds of environments, etc. And certainly the super soldiers, that's the objective there. So I don't know if any of that is helpful to you in your analysis, but it's worthwhile kind of looking at this from a future vantage point, and as you apparently are trying to do, and colleagues like you, I'm sure. But I also think that to some degree this global warming, global cooling thing, a lot of times it breaks down when you look at things over time. There are scientists who have said that, these changes, if you haven't tracked them since, I don't know, 100,000 years, that you really don't get it, because in terms of solar systems, et cetera, this is a much bigger picture. So there's that one argument. The other is that if we are having a changed environment by virtue of a part of space we're going through, that we do pass through periodically, or if we're actually on a trajectory somewhere completely new, which might have to do with us merging with Sagittarius, for example, which is proven by scientists, then there's a whole different ballgame even there. And then bringing in the AI and bringing in species that do thrive in these environments and changing the human genome, et cetera. So we're looking at a big melting pot of something. And I don't know where it leads. And I understand, I'm not trying to get you to solve the equation right here. But I am asking you to, because just thinking that it's going to get colder, in a certain sense, and, take this for what it's worth, could be seen as a model based on scarcity. That, to me, is a false model. Okay, we don't have scarcity. And I've noticed that you have been very careful not to see this as a model based on scarcity, and that scarcity is not authentic. Because in reality, what we have is plenty. If anything, we have too much of everything, but we don't have scarcity. And we're not actually, by the way, we're not overpopulated. That's also a scarcity model that is an illusion. It has to do with how space is utilized on planet Earth and so on. And if you go around the Earth, you will see that we have so much empty land. It always boggles my mind because I travel constantly. And that's just unalterable. That's a fact. We have tons and tons and tons of empty land. So what do you do with it? How are we managing it? All these questions come to the surface. But just wanted to throw all of those things out. And I'm not going to keep you for too much longer. I know we're keeping you for a while. I know that my
I have another thought as well, right? Okay. I have to follow up on that.
Yeah, go ahead.
What's the wild card is the cosmic rays, the galactic cosmic rays. And, it's well known that these galactic cosmic rays encode knowledge as well. So one of the regions of space we're reaching into, and with the weakened magnetosphere on our planet, is so as our sun decreases its activity, that protective magnetic shielding around our planet decreases. Now, the physical aspects are more fireballs can come in. We're getting a lot more space debris. It's traveling further down in the atmosphere because it's just not so dense, so it doesn't burn up as high. But another thing is it allows galactic cosmic rays to penetrate. Now, these galactic cosmic rays, through history, and all the ancients talk about this, are the conduit that ignites the human spiritual aspect and these instant changes, whether it's evolutionary changes physically in the body or mental evolutionary spiritual changes. But these galactic cosmic rays encode light and knowledge together, and they blast through the literally energy wave passing through. Now, these nanoparticulates are known. There's another, okay, you can call it stratospheric aerosol geoengineering if you want to, but another whole layer to the onion of some guys I've talked to that are well knowledgeable into this, it's called cosmic radiation management. Now, some of these nanoparticulates are also known to nullify charge when they're hit by galactic cosmic rays. Now, these same metals, you said they have a purpose for the metal that is up there, is absolutely true in fact. Because the metals that are being chosen in the nanoparticulate forms and sprayed up daily by the how many millions of tons, when galactic cosmic rays come in contact with those, they nullify the charge. Now, the conventional thinking is to nullify the charge so it cannot then produce the base particulate where a cloud can grow from it, or a droplet can form to then make a bigger cloud layer. Now, that's the traditional. What they're talking about just on the surface there is they're trying to nullify the amount of galactic cosmic rays coming in to reduce the amount of new cloud cover that will form. And again, this is all based on Heinrich Svensmark's work with the galactic cosmic rays increasing cloud cover. But then you take it to the whole nother spiritual aspect here. If they're trying to really, like you say, change the consciousness of humanity, if they could stop this galactic bombardment of energy wave, which I really don't think they can, but they're trying to, this falls right in line with this, this cosmic radiation management using the same nanoparticulates to stop the energy field and the light field from flowing in with these cosmic rays into our planet, which it should be at exponential levels where it is now. But you see what they're doing with the terraforming of the atmosphere. I really think that has something to do with it. And then you talk about the UFOs and whatnot, these extra dimensional craft or interdimensional craft, however you want to look at them, could be some of our own tech. I firmly believe a lot of these sightings that we're seeing, some of our own tech using, again, Tesla antigravitics. So that Dr. Brown in the 1960s, excuse me, with antigravitics and our military applications that have suddenly been sighted when they weren't supposed to. But where they're recharging on these points in these vortices, you'll notice one thing. The Earth, they call it an Earth-Sun spot connection. And where we have a coupling of a magnetic field line on the Earth, you'll start to see an intensity, let's say a typhoon's trying to form a hurricane. When they get an interlocking pattern where the sun is actually locked in with the electromagnetically on a field line locking in on, you'll see these typhoons and hurricanes uptick, and they'll really have this incredible strengthening pattern during that time. So these craft you're talking about are riding right in that line. Like for us, it's invisible. But I do feel in the future it's going to become visible, because you look at the petroglyphs across the planet that the ancients had carved into the rocks. They started to see these, what are now invisible to us lines, start to manifest to become visible to the human eye as the resonance frequency changes in this plasma sphere around through our atmosphere. So they're going to be more highly charged. So you got to think about an electrical connection from the sun to the earth, and where that connection pings down onto the surface of our planet, storms form there. Volcanoes erupt there, earthquakes start from there, storms intensify from these points. So why would you, if you're not trying to charge your craft, jump right into that same field line? So, there's a lot of things that flow right on this electrical frequency, electromagnetic, electric universe model here for recharging craft, because, they're not burning fuel. They're using electro frequencies to move around the planet in many ways and shapes and forms, probably centuries ahead of where we are even thinking about right now and what's possible with magnetic field propulsion. And that's kind of my last thought on that cosmic ray there.
Okay. Well, thank you for that. So just in terms of wrapping up, and also, I don't know if you have time for it, but we could have some questions in the chat, and I would encourage them to put questions out there if you have any last minute questions. We've talked about quite a wide range of stuff. There may be more. I think the model of the electrical universe is interesting. You didn't sort of respond to my hologram question. I wasn't sure whether you wanted to, but at any rate, that's open. And any wrap-up comments that you might have?
No, I'd be happy to stay around for questions. That's why we're here to share information. But, you'd alluded to more volcanic eruptions, and just on a physical plane thing here, there's a lot of news articles coming out, and what they do is they usually change the place and then they change the volcano name. But notice this in the media, if anybody's out there watching, they're going to talk about purple skies. And the purple skies are from the volcanic aerosols that are up there. You have to realize we've had 5 stratospheric eruptions since the beginning of the year, actually 6 now with Ryuk and a Shiveluch that just went off. But the volcanic cooling from the aerosols is now apparent, and the skies are changing color slightly because of these aerosols that are up there. Now it's visible to everybody on the planet, so now they have to explain it. But notice in the headlines where they're starting to talk about purple skies being created by volcanic eruptions and aerosols. The name will change, the volcano name will change, the place name will change, the volcano, but they'll still talk about purple skies. So they might, the latest one I just saw yesterday was Colorado's purple skies are blamed on Ryuk eruption. And then previously it was like Russian purple skies are blamed on the Shiveluch eruption. And then we saw earlier, Asian purple skies are blamed on the Ulawan eruption in Indonesia. But wherever you're going across the planet, you're starting to see all these articles about purple skies evolving, and then spaceweather.com had a whole series of purple sky articles on there, and you're starting to see it everywhere. So galactic cosmic rays are known peer-reviewed science to cause eruptions in silica-rich magma chambers, which is really interesting because when we come back to silica and crystals, again, those are information holders. How is it that these galactic cosmic rays, again, light and information, bombard the crystalline structure inside the lava and cause it to explode, cause it to agitate, to bubble in these chambers? So, there's this whole mechanism that's interriding and overlapping, and the light, the information, and then the way that can be held or encoded. So if you want to get into, you're looking at the matrix around you, or you're taking a look at the hologram, it's got to all be intertwined in that way, some fashion or form. And, I just don't have much about the hologram on top of that, except for the cosmic rays and the silica both intertwining, being information mediums, and they're affecting each other on the crust. But look for the purple skies, look for it in a sky near you, and know it's from an eruption. I personally, now this is my own personal feeling. Because I look at space so much, and I know a lot of people could say, oh, those are fake NASA drawings and whatnot. But, looking through telescopes, looking at the other planets, myself with my own eyes through telescopes to see those other planets, they're all round. The sun's round. Everything's round around. And then our planet's just supposed to be flat. So for me, I look at everything around there that I can see personally with the telescope, and I've seen with my own eyes through telescopes, and I don't see anything that's flat. Like it'd be so out of place for everything else to form electrically, and what I know about electromagnetism too, the way it forms bodies and strings of pearls along electroconduits, I just can't see it as being flat. Like we'd be the only one out of all these other bodies that in space that's not flat. So I just, that's my personal feeling, and I'm always open to learning new information. And if I'm ever proven wrong, I will absolutely shift on a dime into a new way I absorb information or look at it. But for the flat Earth, I haven't seen it yet, so I'm not a believer in that. Personal opinion, though.
No problem. No, and that makes perfect sense. And I have my own. Sorry, I was muted when I asked. just was asking the question. Sorry about that. At any rate, he answered, he had said what he had to say about flat Earth, but I don't see any specific questions coming up in the chat at the moment. So guys, last chance, and any direct questions for our guest. There has been a very active chat room, let me say. So you've got a lot of enthusiasm out there, a lot of very positive comments coming to you as a guest, which is nice to see.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I think this is a topic which is very timely, and I think people are very interested to know more. So it'd be great to have you back on the show. Sounds like you travel quite a bit, and you're out doing conferences and whatnot. So, and also if you can recommend other people to bring on my show that will talk about these topics, maybe more about the electric universe, that sort of thing, please do refer them to me. So somebody says VE17. What to do if it erupts? I'm not sure. What is VE17?
That's a VEI7. That's a volcanic explosivity index of 7. Now, a VEI7 would be a Tambora, a year without a summer eruption. So now, I'm not saying hoarding, but if there's a VEI7 eruption, you quit your job, you stop, you call off to work, you go immediately and get as much money out of the bank as you can, and you go buy as much food as you can. Now, I would say something completely different. Now, there's the caveat here. I would say something completely different if the governments of the world had been telling us all along that these events were going to happen, that we were all preparing together, and that they were setting up the conditions so we all could get prepared. Because a VEI7 means the very next year we have no food grown on this planet for 2 straight years. Exactly what happened in the year without a summer. They don't call it that for no reason, the year without a summer. And then you saw the paintings of the time and that ash stayed in the air for a good 8 to 9 years, affecting agriculture production. But those first years were tumultuous. I mean, they talked about snows every single month through the entire year. Nothing grew. They called it the Great Suffering, or these kind of terminologies were used for the year after that eruption. Now, if the governments are on board and warning us and telling us and getting us to prepare for all these events, like, everybody would be having, no fear at it, because, all right, we can grow our own food indoors. We have all these solutions. We've, retrofitted shopping malls, parking garages, et cetera, to grow food indoors. No problem. We can all get along with it. We can share. But it's just not going to be that way. I'm sorry. You're going to have to take your own action for your own self. And, the abundance and scarcity, lack of, or, you're going to have to look at it in 2 ways there. Because the world is completely unprepared for an event like that. Completely unprepared for an event of a VEI7 eruption. The biggest one we got was the VEI5 that occurred down in Ulawan. Didn't even make news because I don't think they wanted to talk about, the effects, the knock-on effects. But we're starting to see it now. These purple skies are a direct effect of these now 6 stratospheric eruptions. Now, the highest one went up to 70,000 feet. A VEI7 is going to push ash up to around 140,000 feet or so. But so far, we're about halfway there, up to 65, 70,000 foot on a lot of these eruptions. So hence, expect a little cooling just based on the purple skies that you're going to see. VEI7, you do not want to wake up in the morning and see there's been a VEI7 eruption globally. That is a society-ending event in itself, based on past historicals. In the 1200 AD, we get the same thing, and you go back to the late antique little ice age, where they had 3 of those eruptions happen at the same time. And then you look at what happened globally. They had the plagues run through because people were getting so sick because they were breathing sulfur dioxide. The food wasn't growing properly. It was only growing to a fraction of its normal harvest size. People were eating nutrient depleted foods. And you just had that full toxic mix going on. And this is late antique little ice age, say like 535 to 543, that era there when the eruptions took place and where the food scarcity was happening. So anytime we have big volcanic eruptions, not a good thing. But anyway, I know that might be, to talk about, I wouldn't say hoarding food, but go buy what you can, because nobody else is going to help you during that time. And, we are on our own during some of this, there's some ways to think about prepping and being ready for it, not to, have like 65 gas masks and all this thing. but really getting some food ready for yourself, knowing that the prices would skyrocket exponential and then the availability would, the faucet would slowly turn off after probably a month or two. You just wouldn't be able to get foods in the stores as available as we have today. So it'd be better to edge on the err on the side of caution and go out and buy a bunch of food, long-term food storage as well, things in cans, dried foods, etc. Same thing that you'd prep for now.
Okay. So one person's asking if you're going to be at something called LeakCon. LeakCon? I don't know. That sounds like a conference.
I was at LeakCon in May of 2019. That was in Denver, Colorado. And, Deborah Tavares, who talks about the fires over in California, she and I had quite a few good conversations when we were speaking at Alternative View 10 over in London. And at the end of this month, I'm going back to London for Alternative View 10.1 to speak on the same things about the grand solar minimum, along with John Kitson, who you had on your show, about 5G awareness. And I'm going to be going down with Piers Corbin and Ian Crane and a few others to do 2 other cities across the UK, Glastonbury and down in Totnes and Devon, to talk about these same issues, but try to overlap different, like you say, this whole tapestry here that's coming together of why governments are behaving like this, where the economy might morph to, and some of these changes that we can predict through past cycles, although deal with it very differently today. So the LeakCon is already finished. For 2019, we're planning to do it again in May again, and it's going to be more this time. Instead of having it in a hotel venue, we were trying to get out on site where we could but have some of these skill sets built into the conference. So people could go wild foraging around the venue in the forest. We were going to have it in more of a natural location and just invite 100 people or so you'd get more hands-on and you could actually get some of these skills, like, hey, go start a fire, go wild forage. What kind of things are edible, just different ways to build things using natural materials, and just to have it more of a hands-on, but also get the information at the same time. So that's set for 2020, LeakCon 2020.
All right. So let's see. And somebody asked about Nibiru, Planet X, if you had any thoughts on that.
I'm on the fence about that. You alluded to that as well, the electromagnetic influence disturbing the planetary orbit. So, everything's got to keep its space. If you look at atoms, the reason that we have things that are holding pattern is because they have their electrical influence and other things bounce off of it. They don't just slam into each other. So if you're talking about a huge extraplanetary body, brown dwarf that would be coming in, its electromagnetic field would also have enough push to displace bodies to make them speed up faster in their orbits, maybe move in on an orbit, maybe pull back on an orbit. But we haven't seen that. We've seen these electromagnetic effects across the entire solar system. But as far as I know, I haven't seen any orbital displacement yet. Now, here's another thing. Here's a caveat. In 2024, all the 4 Jovian gas giants are going to be in the same quadrant, making a perfect square. And that's going to pull our Earth out slightly, just from the electromagnetic effects. And any of you that are into astrology out there, I encourage you to look out into June of 2024 and take a look at what the planetary alignments are, because we haven't seen this type of planetary geometry since 79 AD. They literally match up with less than 1/2 a degree of accuracy of all 4 planets where the Earth is with what it was in 79 AD. And you can't really find any matching pattern that's that precise pretty much unless we go back thousands of years. So hence one of the reasons I believe that it's a more powerful cycle is the planetary geometry and the way things electromagnetically with our planets, the way they line up. But that Nibiru, or the Planet X, or whatever you like to call it, I haven't seen any displacement or heard about any displacement in the orbit of our regular planets. So I just don't have an answer because I don't have enough information. It's not that I don't disbelieve it. I honestly really do believe it's out there. Absolutely, yes. I mean, you can't have this many texts and cuneiform texts and, from the Assyrians to the Sumerians and everybody writing about it in between. And then you go down with Michael Tellinger's work and you got all these South African gold mines down there, 500,000 years old. We got our whole civilization and society like 21 million years old. And we go around through all these cycles in itself. So how many iterations and communication opportunities have we had with such an extraplanetary body? I firmly believe it's out there, but I just don't know if it's right here inbound at this time. And that's kind of all I can say about that. I just don't have enough information on it in terms of at this second.
Okay, that's fine. There's a lot of conflicting testimony in that regard. I can tell you Project Camelot has gotten in our 15 years of operations. So the jury's still out on that story, believe me. Okay. At any rate, it's been great having you on the show. I want to thank you very much for being such a clear speaker and laying out your understandings for us, and also for the thought-provoking discussion. And it's possible that, hopefully more people will be reading your book. We can get more information in the future and get into this discussion even deeper. So thank you again for coming on the show.
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity. And, you loosened a lot of ideas in my mind to think in different ways and directions that I wasn't until we spoke, which is really interesting because, this whole spiritual aspect of it, I've been talking about the spiritual aspect of the rising vibration, being able to take advantage of these more, we're in a more resonant time anyway, but you got me thinking in a whole different angle over here, totally different facet of the diamond that I was never looking at before. So thank you for that. And anybody who wants to see more of the work that I do, Adapt 2030 is the channel on YouTube, and the podcast, Mini Ice Age Conversations, where it's a full half hour going into single subjects on this same ideologue here. So Adapt 2030 or Mini Ice Age Conversations, and the website's oilseedcrops.org. And I put everything that I do in the audio visual content. I take the time to get the transcripts and put all the pictures in there and then make it into a written form in a PDF so you can actually look at the charts and the graphs and you can share it with people. Start the conversation with others, because if you just tell them something, a lot of times it's real difficult to wrap the head around it. But if you say, hey, I'm going to tell you this, and hey, here's this whole PDF with all these charts about, solar cycles and temperature graphs and all these things in a chart, and then you can give it to somebody in a PDF where then they can then themselves take the time to look at it. It's just an easier way to start conversations on these things we need to talk about these days. So thank you, and that's kind of it.
Well, thanks everyone for watching and listening, and thanks again, David, and we'll hopefully have you back, and good luck with all your work out there, and please do keep in touch.
Will do. Thanks. Talk to you next time. Bye.
Okay. So thanks everyone for watching, as I said, and it's been a lot of fun. This is a fascinating discussion. I think there's so much more that we can get into once you get into this electric universe idea, and hope we can possibly bring some guests on in the future to actually go in that direction. So let's see, this is Friday. Have a great weekend, and we'll be back next week. And I think I'm being interviewed at some point. I forget where Jeff Doherty is going to be on November 4th, going to be interviewing me. I think that's set up. And there was someone in the chat asking about that. And thanks everyone again for supporting my work, and take care and have a great weekend. Take care. Bye.